I was flipping, I was doing really well. But from a cash flow management standpoint, all those flips needed a lot of capital to put into them. I certainly encourage you to do it, but I encourage you to do research and make sure that you know where your income is going to be coming from and how it's going to be paying your daily living expenses, as well as continue growing the business.
Welcome, everyone, to the Road Less Traveled Show. This is a show about people that were successful in a previous career and left that career to go down a different path. I'm your co-host, Richard Coyne.
And I'm your co-host, Bill Zahller.
On today's show, we're so pleased to have Karl Krauskopf with us. Karl, welcome.
Welcome. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here and really looking forward to the conversation, guys.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you again, Karl, for being on the Road Less Traveled Show. To start with, can you tell our listeners a little bit about your background, what line of work you're originally in?
Sure. So I live in Seattle, Washington, and spent about 10 years in corporate strategy and business development for a healthcare business services company, where we essentially changed the reimbursement model for hospitals and physician groups and insurance companies. Really, really convoluted, complex matrix and services company, one that was still being adopted by the marketplace. And again, spent 10 years in that. Last 2 years of that career, I started transitioning out and just understanding and getting into house flipping and owning small rentals. Mm-hmm. And after that transition, and have now been a full-time real estate investor for the last 2 years.
Excellent. And what markets do you look at when you're investing in real estate?
Sure. So locally in Seattle, the Puget Sound area, also a little bit more in the Washington State bases. But I was just in your neck of the woods in North Carolina. So I did a lot of apartment tours in Greensboro, Burlington, Charlotte, Raleigh, and didn't quite get as far out into the mountains of North Carolina as I would have liked to. But that is certainly on the docket for the next visit.
Great. Yeah.
And just to echo on that, I think the one thing there is that I pointed out from a market perspective is, not overreaching, not too broad in terms of, I'm looking in every single part of the United States. I'm looking in 10 different states or whatever it happens to be. I'm very, very focused on my Puget Sound region in Seattle, where I'm local, and then 3 out-of-state cities, markets, if you will, in North Carolina.
Oh, excellent. Yeah. We obviously like the North Carolina markets as well. Yeah, they're strong markets when you mentioned.
Well, good. So, yes. Karl, if you look back to your healthcare strategy days, is there a funny story you can share, something that happened to you?
Oh, wow. That is a great question. So I think the funniest question, the funniest instance is just really understanding that as a wraparound service to providing services back over to employers or physician groups. Maybe not necessarily the funny part, but the part where whatever we were doing was ultimately adding cost to the consumer. Mm-hmm. Which really is the reason kind of I started shifting out of the healthcare space and really fell out of love with business services and healthcare, was because, again, we were adding to the margin, we were adding additional cost to the consumer. Mm-hmm. And when you're in it for ideally reducing cost to the consumer, you see what you're actually doing, which again was kind of that catalyst of wanting to exit, wanting to find something else outside of healthcare to help produce and generate income.
Nice. I'll tell you what, it is very interesting to hear other people as we talk about the American healthcare system and a lot of things in general, but just I'll give one specific example. And again, first of all, I'm a capitalist. I believe in profit. I believe obviously in providing a quality service for your customer, but at the same point in time, things are out of control. Right. My cousin, she broke her wrist in 3 places. The bill before healthcare was like $52,000. I'm like, are you kidding me? That's ridiculous. And another person just shared with me some particular medication that they need to take. I think it's for type 2 diabetes, where this particular medication is over $1,000 a month
Insane.
with insurance. And this particular person, his mother he's Indian, so she goes back to India. She can buy a year's worth of that same medication for $200.
Yep.
Come on, that's ridiculous. I get profit, but at the same point in time, something's wrong. So
yeah, so medical tourism, the topic, the idea of where you can go out overseas to receive care, whether it's surgical, whether it's pharmaceutical, or whatever it happens to be. There are places in the world with equal to, greater than or equal to quality of care as the United States, and you're going to get a fraction. And when I say a fraction, examples like you just gave are absolutely prevalent all across the world. Singapore, one of the best rated quality healthcare that can be provided. Again, fraction of the cost, surgical, pharmaceutical. So totally agree. And for me, it's somewhat similar in the sense that from a naturopathic and primary care physician type environment is, we're really seeing private pay, i.e. cash pay instead of insurance model, start to take a bigger hold in the marketplace, which, I can certainly empathize with consumers in wanting to not necessarily pay an insane amount for the premium, pay an insane amount for the actual procedure, whether it's surgical, pharmaceutical, preventative, et cetera. That private pay, the cash pay model is absolutely starting to take hold.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Wow.
What was a deciding factor that, for your consulting role that made you want to leave and transition the real estate world? You said there was some, disenchantment, I guess, with the model you had and alignment of, how you guys viewed things as far as what you were able to accomplish. And, but was there any one particular deciding factor one day that you said, I've got to transition out, and how did you get into real estate as that out?
Sure. So I think it was twofold. It was the disenchantment from a healthcare perspective. Again, just seeing that anything that we were adding on into the business model from a services standpoint was ultimately being passed down to the consumer. So that was kind of point A that led to the disenchantment. Point two was my wife and I were looking at starting a family and bringing in an expense into this world without necessarily the net new income to offset it. So at the time, my wife was a school counselor. You could look 10 years in the future, look at the salary schedule, and you could tell exactly how much she would be making, barring any kind of, major bumps or decreases to that salary schedule, which typically don't happen. Yeah. And then for me, working in corporate on a non-commission based job, most probably is that what would happen from a pay perspective would be 12 to 18 months out from anything that I was doing today. And it would be based on not only my performance, but the company's performance, and whether or not they had the allotment to be able to offer a bonus, or if they had a role or a promotion, which would again increase the income. So it really just did not line up in terms of gratification, both long and short-term gratification. So started looking at other investment vehicles, stock trading. This was before crypto became big. I knew about real estate investing in the past because I obviously had done it from a primary residence standpoint. Obviously, there's a lot of folks that say primary residence isn't necessarily an investment. It's more of a liability. And, that's a wholly different topic, a longer topic, longer conversation. But I knew about it. And so I started to research, read a lot of books, listened to podcasts like this. And, I really started falling in love with the process of I can make and change something physically, add value to it, and then resell it or hold it and have cash flow.
Right. Yeah. Nice. Yeah.
Those options, you can kind of build your own path that way, right? If you're looking more appreciation driven, if it's a side hustle, or if you need more cash flow, it's your primary job, or a combination of both. You flip some, keep some, and it's a beautiful thing about real estate. It's as creative as you want to be with it.
Yep, exactly. I think that's the way that I looked at it initially, was just kind of as a side hustle. And then quickly after, a handful of successful exits on single family flips, it was, oh, wow, my income is now significantly higher than a W-2 perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Let's start evaluating what a corporate exit would look like.
Yeah, that's great. And one of the things we always talk about on the show is that, listen, you enjoy your W-2 job, great, excel at it, make as much money as you possibly can. You mentioned, your point was that, you weren't in a commission structure, so you were limited in how much money you could make. But at the same point in time, even if you love your job, still do it, great. But definitely invest and find something else to generate another stream of income, because you never know when you're going to need that. And there is no loyalty from employers to employees at all, period. None. That disappeared a long time ago. Some say it was when ERISA happened in 1974, when basically you became responsible for your own retirement. Right. There was no such thing as a corporate pension anymore. And, but at the same point in time, again, we believe strongly in educating yourself to be able to create another stream of income. Even if you love your W-2 job, just do something else to help generate money. So good deal.
Yeah.
Good deal. Yeah.
Totally agreed. And, I would echo that to physicians, attorneys, other, high paying, high net worth individuals who, for one reason or another, really enjoy what it is that they're doing. And typically that's what I found is that's in the healthcare provider space, i.e. the physicians, the high paying hospital executives, where they have direct impact on patient care. Yeah. And that's usually an emotional tie to what they're doing. Right. And for those folks, you may not necessarily be able to get that emotional tie in a real estate, in a full-time active real estate investor perspective. So to your point, Richard, if you're making great money, if you're enjoying what you're doing from a W-2 perspective, continue to do it, continue to crush it, impact lives in that way. But the biggest but, to make sure you're doing what you can with your capital, whether it's, with your disposable income, and investing that. So that way, again, you've got that cash flow moving forward.
Right. And our corollary and follow on to that is that, look, if you're happy with what you're getting in the stock market, good, great. But again, there's other things. And quite honestly, a lot of other people have become very frustrated with the stock market, very frustrated with their 401k, and that they only get choice of mutual fund A, B, or C. And, I've realized that, with some side capital, they can invest in other things, and you don't need to be a millionaire to invest in real estate. You can invest in real estate with some money down. I'm not going to sit here and say no money down, but some money. You may be able to find a way to do a true no money deal, but that's not something I would look for. But I'm happy to put my own capital into a deal because I believe in the deal. So anyway, we'll keep going. But Karl, as you kind of start shifting over to the real estate, you mentioned you were doing some flips and things like that. Are there any obstacles you can mention that you had to overcome?
Yeah, from an obstacle perspective, I think the biggest thing, and maybe a better way to say it is from a lesson learned perspective, is to help audience understand some of the big quagmires of falling into during your flip process and even during your development process is lien waivers. So I've fallen through on the front end of my investing career during flips and developments was not necessarily following the clear-cut documentation process for obtaining lien waivers. And so why is that critical? It's so important as you go through, mid-size to large size cost projects where you're adding value. Again, you're either doing new construction or you're doing massive renovations on properties, and you're obtaining these lien waivers, essentially saying whether you're working with a general contractor or subcontractor or large supplier, where you're saying, I've paid you, you are now releasing your rights to lien my property. Now, if you're, a side hustler, this is your side hustle and it's a little bit too much from a documentation standpoint, eventually it'll probably catch up with you. And what that means is you're going to go through a large project and you're going to spend $100,000 or maybe in some other cases, $2 million on the construction side. And then all of a sudden you're on the back end of the project and you say that you've paid for this, that, and the other, but your subcontractor, your general contractor comes to you and says, oh, we never got payment for that.
Right.
And so then you have to go through the burden of proof to show that you did pay for that specific item. And then even still, there may be, if you're paying a general contractor, then there may be some other issues that the subcontractor has against you. So making sure that as you go through the process to slow down and obtain those lien waivers, so that way you can protect your bottom line at the end of the day.
That's a great point. And we go through the lien waiver process as required. So we're always on top of that. But what's the threshold of dollar amount that you typically are saying you're going to look for a lien waiver on?
So I would say it is mostly situational in that if I'm doing a single flip or if I'm doing something on a small size and I'm using a general contractor. So let's get some super specific examples. So right now I'm building a detached ADU in my backyard. I'm putting up 1,000 square foot separate structure. And on that, I'm getting a lien waiver absolutely for every single invoice. I'm getting a conditional and an unconditional lien waiver on every single invoice that I'm getting from my general contractor. First invoice was $41,000. Second invoice was $180,000. And each time that I'm getting those invoices, again, I am requiring that my general contractor signs those lien waivers, then that he's also submitting all of his lien waivers from his suppliers and subcontractors. Now, I'm not going to go in and require a $500 general labor cleanup or a couple $100, anything I would say below $1,000. And it's more on the general labor / cleanup side. Yeah. Those are going to be more difficult to obtain lien waivers from those typically those types of subs. But the big line item, very clear cut work was done. Lien waivers, absolutely every single time.
That's a great point. I don't think we've talked about that one. We've talked about asset protection many times before, but at the same point in time, that's a great one to really be very tuned into because you're right. It could be, even if it's an innocent mistake, it's still going to tie you up for a long time. It could really, really screw you up on a closing if suddenly a lien waiver pops up and you're like, oh my God, even if it just does ultimately get cleared up, you could have blown that contract because of a lien waiver being filed. So because of a lien being filed. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's one of the biggest risks, especially in the last 12 months, maybe 15 months, when we've seen the rates increasing. Back in February 2021, things started getting shaky then. And if you were in a position where you were trying to close in March, April of last year, and all of a sudden, like you said, you had a lien waiver pop up, lien pop up, and you've got buyers on the hook under a contract, there's the potential, because you're not providing a marketable title.
Yep. Then
that means the buyer can back out with no penalties against them. They get to get their earnest money back, et cetera. Then you're in a really sticky situation. Even if you and the sub, the general, whatever it happens to be, do agree that you did actually make the payment, you're still at risk for losing that contract. And again, in these days when buyers, you need a buyer, if you lose a buyer, that could be weeks, if not months, before you get another one.
And it might not be the same price.
It might not be the same price. That's exactly right.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, Karl, can you think back to what was one of your first victories as you transitioned from the W-2 to the real estate side of it that kind of solidified the fact that, I've made the right choice. This is a doable plan and we're on the right track?
Sure. So there was a flip that I did. It was a flip and then converted it into a house hack. We ended up selling it, and it was a flip with a partner of mine. His name is Augustus Bukowski, big loan originator here in the market. And he'd been a developer for about 15 years at this point, having developed over 250 different units. And it was just a great learning experience for me to be able to partner and bring him value to that project. And so I think at that point, must have been in the second full year of flipping, which would have been, in this case, the last year of my corporate job. Was, again, one of those instances where I really truly understood what the whole process was. That's when I learned about the lien waivers. That's when I learned about how to truly be on site and influencing others from a subcontractor perspective. And that's when I knew, and that's when I felt the success to be able to continue and emulate that going forward into future projects.
Yeah, nice.
Great.
Nice. Good. So, Karl, is there a funny story that's happened to you recently in your real estate world now that you can share?
Oh, funny story. Okay. Oof. I have not thought of any funny stories lately. Let's think about that for a second. So, funny story. Actually, here we go. I closed on a 30-unit apartment complex last year. Super excited. It was a great project. I maintained and kept up my deal room link, which contained the underwriting and the executive summary and all that great stuff. Fantastic project, running smoothly, stabilizing it, going well. I get a new investor inquiry on my investor dashboard asking if there are still any slots available for investment. So obviously the conversation was, oh no, unfortunately this is closed, but we've got other investment opportunities. Would love to have a conversation with you. The investor went silent, reached back out a couple times, no response. Thought it was a little bit interesting. Let it kind of settle for about a week or two. After that, I get an email back from the same person who submitted the inquiry, who was actually a tenant at the apartments that we had closed on last year. The same one that she was submitting an inquiry about. Come to find out, she was a disgruntled, unhappy tenant in the space, and used that as a soapbox to voice some concerns about the property, as opposed to coming through the normal channels. So it was a little bit of an odd and lesson learned in the sense of locking down the deal room and locking down certain type of material, especially after you go to close. So funny story, not really. Obviously I followed up with her and, trying to work out whatever it is that she's unhappy about and doing what we can as owners to provide value back over to her and her partner. But again, lock down your deal room. Don't let those underwriting files stay out there into perpetuity.
Right.
So we were really going to be impressed if you said you converted her to invest in your next deal.
No. I wish.
That's right.
Yeah. But it isn't.
I took my foot off the throttle on that topic and started pumping the brakes.
Right. Yeah. It is interesting how people will try to find any forum to complain. I mean, we've seen the online complaints, of course, and we saw one that came through a channel where it almost seemed as if this resident somehow got access to a source like CoStar to find out who the ultimate owner was. I'm like, well,
sure.
What? How are they? It wasn't even addressed to us. It was addressed to somebody else. But I'm like, yeah, creative people will find a way, right, to complain. So,
ultimately, I'm thankful for it. Obviously, the lesson learned about, locking down the deal room and the underwriting file and making sure who's getting access. That's that was a great lesson learned in a low risk way. So I'm appreciative for it from that perspective, but ultimately too, I'm thankful for the ability to have one-on-one conversations with tenants in a truly vulnerable way, right? I mean, they came to us saying, "Hey, like we're unable to afford rent going forward. We want to stay, so forth and so on." And again, it's just a great way to reconnect with the tenants and really understand. Again, like you said earlier, Richard, we're capitalists at heart, but ultimately we still want to make sure we're providing value back over to the tenant base, back to the community.
Right.
Well, Carl, where are you today on your journey? You, like I said, you've gone from, fix and flips, and you've done, this sort of 30-unit apartment complex. And so kind of where are you today? What assets are you pursuing? You're building the auxiliary dwelling unit out back to. So, I mean, it seems like you have a little different irons in the fire. Are there multiple strategies you're pursuing going forward, or are you focused on any one particular piece of the real estate puzzle?
Sure. So two strategies. It is the multifamily value add and the development space. And specifically on the developments, it is the missing middle, the ADU DADU, so the accessory dwelling units and the detached accessory dwelling units. Right now, Washington State is on the final stretch of approving a couple House bills. I forget the numbers, but I know one is House Bill 1337 that essentially opens up the floodgates and allows for all properties in Washington State to remove the restrictions around owner-occupied ADUs and DADU developments. Mm-hmm. So essentially, you could go out and buy any property, and as long as it fits from a zoning perspective and fits from a land use perspective, building a DADU and an ADU, so 1,000 square foot, two each, two per property each. And then it also removes the restriction, or rather, it allows the ability to sell or condominiumize those ADUs and DADUs on the property. So that way you can obtain separate financing and or sell it separately. So this is really geared towards opening up the supply, the ability to build more on in cities that have a certain population level. So again, this is going to open up supply, which is great from an affordability issue. So that's strategy A. Strategy B, again, is the multifamily value add, which is more so of my focus, which is finding properties that are under rented, that have operational issues, i.e. unfixed, deferred maintenance, ways that we can eliminate operating expenses through maybe capital expense upgrades. One item, for instance, that I like is removing natural gas and replacing it with electric, primarily on the heating source. So I've got a 12 unit that I'm closing in the month of June 2023. That's the year that we're in, June 2023, where it's got about a $10,000 gas boiler expense annually. So the idea to go in is eliminate that gas boiler, replace it with electric heat pumps, and displace that expense back over to the tenant base in a low cost way, while also giving them the ability to have air conditioning.
Yeah, there you go.
So
yeah,
nice. Yeah, it's interesting how, a lot of times, the 10s, the 20s, the 30 units, sometimes, utilities are included. And, that's a huge expense, especially when there's no, or at least not necessarily a fully, okay, this is how much water you use, so you pay for your use. If it's just a general bill. We had a 216 unit property that we owned that had one water bill. We're like, they were billing back, but they weren't billing anywhere close to being enough. So it was losing tons of money. So we worked to fix that. So you're right. Those are the kind of operational efficiencies that you can do to help, the property optimize. So
on that particular asset, if you don't mind me asking, did you increase the utility bill back, or did you do a water main, not subdivision, but water main submetering?
Yeah, the property actually had been submetered at one point, and the prior owner had ended that process because they're typically pretty onerous and pain to work with. So what we did was we actually implemented a low flow water saving system, as well as aerators and all the faucets to really reduce the water usage. And we did increase the bill back. And it made a substantial difference.
Great.
There could have even been more that a future owner could do, but we did sell the property. So
I think leaving meat on the bone for that. I think that's a topic in and of itself, is understanding who your buyer is. That not enough people talk about, in my opinion. Is we're going to go in, we're going to fix up these apartments, we're going to make them nice, beautiful, we're going to increase rent, we're going to decrease operating expenses. But, voicing and making sure that we're talking about who the end buyer is going to be whether it's a 1031 exchange buyer or if it's a value add investor, you have to curate what you're doing to that end buyer. So for instance, going in and putting together a proven business plan around, again, we're going to go renovate 25% of the units, get them on premium platinum level rents. And then here's the proven strategy for the new value add investor to come in and try and buy it and then take it the rest of the way. That value add investor better be thinking about who their buyer is, because they're either going to continue and complete the renovation strategy, and at which point they would be selling it to a 1031 exchange, life co, et cetera, et cetera. So making sure that as you're going through these value add strategies, you're keeping that end buyer in mind.
Yeah. And that's one thing I think, sometimes people understand, like small changes in the front end, like to the example we were just talking about, the water usage there. When we took over that property, it was like 216 units, like Richard said, in Atlanta, was losing, I think, around 89,000 from what they're building back, and what we shrank that to capture 60 of that back. So 2/3 of that we were able to get back with the two strategies, like increasing the still below market rent, or in line with a water usage rent, and then to the neighboring competitor, and then the low flow toilet, shower head area, all that. And that, $60,000 at a 6.5 cap, which is C property, there was, $923,000 we were able to create in the value. So it's small things on the front end, 216 units.
Huge.
Yeah, exactly. Downstream, it makes a real difference on the value add strategy. Yeah. So like you said, there's more, and that's the thing we love about multifamily value add is there's multiple levers you can do. I mean, that's just the water, right? And then the rent increases if you do $100 per unit. 216 times 12 divided by 6. Again, that's close to $4 million in value add for, like I said, and you get a proven strategy to turn for the next buyer. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love it.
Yeah. And again, but to your point of thinking who your next buyer is that's a great point. If you're intending to buy a property and hold it for 20 years, just sort of it becomes part of your portfolio and just you stay with it forever. Great. That's awesome. But at the same point in time, we're running a value add strategy where we are thinking in a 5 to 7 year timeline. So there is another buyer down the road. We have obviously need to think about who that is. Is it a life co? Is this market something where, we could make a dumb mistake and over improve given the resident base? So a lot of things to think about, but some good points there, Karl. So good. So Karl, as you think about maybe your business, maybe your personal life, is there something you can mention that you do to, in a way, give back and to help others in some way?
I think that's a great question. Obviously, aside from the community standpoint of going in and improving these facilities and offering, affordable housing, that's one thing. I think from a personal side, for me, it's really being able to help getting into the health and wellness is really helping folks understand, what they can be doing from a longevity standpoint and improving their health. This isn't anything that I have from a formal or structured standpoint, but it's, again, showcasing things that I've done in my life to improve my health, my wellness, in anticipation of improving my longevity. Longevity being not only increasing the amount of time that I'm here on Earth, but increasing the quality of time that I'm here on Earth. So things like diet, exercise are absolutely, if you're ever talking to me on this, in an informal way, I'm typically talking about either real estate, investments, or health and wellness. And so again, what I can do in helping others understand what it is that they can do to improve their health, i.e., for me, I've been on a carnivorous diet for the last 14 months. So really, truly eating red meat, eggs, fish. That's it for 14 months. It's been great. It's been incredible for my body, been incredible for my clarity. I've been doing blood testing over the last every 6 months. And in some cases, I did every 3 months on the front end to really understand, what's happening from the outside of my body as well as what's happening on the inside of my body. And then curating some of the things around, maybe some of the really high LDL and how I can improve that. And then whether or not it truly is a heart risk because of other indicators within the blood. From an exercise standpoint, obviously, living up here in Seattle, I love the mountains. I love getting on the trails. And so it's, again, giving back and trying to include and trying to grow a larger group base of folks who come out and, essentially forest bathe, which is an interesting topic or interesting way to say just being outside in nature. Nice. So kind of, again, this mentality of being outside, being active, and taking care of ourselves.
Yeah, it is such an important thing. You're right. We talk about changing your career in this show, but at some point in time, there's other dimensions to your life that are equally important. Maybe your career is how you would generate money to live on, but at some point in time, you got to take care of your health and your whole perspective on life. And again, having, I get to look at I'm at 3,150 feet where I live, and I get to look at a 6,000 foot peak every day. So that's nice. Pretty awesome to look out my window. I'm looking at it right now. It's beautiful. So yeah. Definitely get some exercise out there. So good. Yeah. Excellent.
Well, can you tell us something you've recently implemented in your business that's allowed you to scale as you continue to grow?
Sure. Hiring folks. So have recently hired an acquisition analyst who is helping on the deal qualification, the deal sourcing, and getting us to a position where we are more regularly getting in front of brokers with letters of intent. And just again, being more open and being more transparent around what it is that we can and cannot buy, and what the cap rates are that we can and cannot afford. So I'd say it's hiring folks and getting back control over the operations and making sure that, again, we are in front of brokers, we're in front of lenders, we're in front of investors, and doing everything that we can do to close on properties and operate properties.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we have a lot of conversations, obviously, and found that, again, the same thing as you start out, you kind of do everything because you're a one-man show, but then, and in the beginning, you need to learn all the aspects of it too. But like I said, at a certain point, it transitions, you get so much going on, you can't multifamily, is not you have to have a team for it. You can't do everything yourself. And then you're either stuck working in your business versus working on your business. Like you're talking about now, you can grow, and it allows you to scale. And, we talked about a recent book, Who Not How. You find people to do the work for you, and you don't have to figure out how to do everything yourself. There's experts who already know how to do that. And again, the team building concept, I think, is critical. A lot of people miss in the beginning.
Yeah.
And it's hard, right? I mean, as a first time solopreneur, how you hire folks is difficult when you're capital strapped on the front end. And so that certainly is the difficult part. No doubt. And so typically the motion there is to go out and partner, give away equity, and as opposed to giving out payment, which totally agree. I think that's the way to start. That's the easiest way to start, the lowest cost way to start. But really having a good grasp around that, you have to have, so that way you're not giving away too much, so that way you still have control over the direction of your own ship. Now that obviously works for the folks that want to lead the organization. If you want to come in and add value to another leader, totally different topic, totally different arrangement. How do I bring you value, Bill? It's coming in and understanding who you are, what you're looking for, what you're doing, and doing all that research on the front end before I come to you. And then it's, hey, Bill, I found this particular property, or, I've underwritten this. I found this particular relationship that I know that you've been looking for based on maybe it's social cues, social marketing. And, I'm doing this in no expectations of a return of favor. And so it's building relationships in that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Richard, I mentioned all the time on the show that, even though we do real estate, we always say we're in the relationship business, not the real estate business. Because at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to, right? It's the contacts you have, who you can help. Everybody. It's amazingly small world when you really get into like the multifamily side of it. There's so many people. You're just a couple of people removed from the kind of all tie back in. So yeah, 100% agree.
Right.
Yeah. So Karl, what advice would you share with somebody who's considering making a path change?
I would say make sure you know your next 12 to 24 month play. really understanding and making sure that you understand that you can operate within, a feast or famine type environment. I think that was one thing that wasn't really talked about a lot, or that I understood really well going into that first year of entrepreneurship was, obviously I was flipping, I was doing really well, but from a cash flow management standpoint, all those flips needed a lot of capital to put into them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I didn't realize that, all of a sudden my, 6-figure salary stops. But I'm also having to fund, these 5 different flips with the same capital pool. So it was difficult at first to juggle both my living expenses as well as the expenses needed to continue operating and to continue growing the company. So, if you're considering stepping out on your own, I certainly encourage you to do it, but I encourage you to do research and make sure that you know where your income is going to be coming from and how it's going to be paying your daily living expenses, as well as continue growing the business.
Great advice.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Karl, what's the best way for our listeners to reach out, learn more about what you have going on?
Sure. I absolutely love my social channel, LinkedIn. I think that is one way that I really love engaging interested parties who either want to invest, partner with, broker sales, whatever it happens to be, and really understand what it is that I'm looking for and what I'm growing. I'm also happy to connect there on for anybody that's looking to learn more about the transition from corporate to entrepreneurship. Both that channel is really where I like to post and do most of my one-to-one interactions.
Nice.
Good. Yeah, great. Yeah, we find a lot of value in LinkedIn as well. Yeah, it's a great platform.
Yep.
Well, really want to thank you for being on the Road Less Traveled show today. I really enjoyed the conversation and wish you continued success.
Likewise.
Karl, thank you for being on. We really appreciate it. We also like to thank our listeners. Please continue to give us a 5-star rating so we can bring you more great content like our show today with Karl Krauskopf. And we also want to remind everybody of 2 important things Park Capital Partners has going on. First of all, that's the Park Capital Partners Value Add Fund, which is a 506c fund open today to accredited investors. And then secondly, the Park Capital Partners Foundation, which is a 501(c) nonprofit that Bill and I created as another way that we give back. Very quickly, the way that works first is that Bill and I fund it. So all the money donated to the foundation goes to do its best work, which is to help others. Second, we donate personally. Third, corporately, we donate. And then finally, when investors invest with us in one of our projects, we make a donation to honor that investor to a pre-selected list from 15 different charities. So that way the investors can also not only make returns, but also feel good about it and helping somebody else. So please reach out to say hello anytime to Bill and I. We are at parkcapitalpartnersllc.com. Happy to have conversations and talk with you about your investing goals and objectives. And again, thank you, Karl, for being on. Remember, folks, the road less traveled may be calling you. We recommend that you listen and take action. Thanks for joining.